The notion that the mainstream media uses climate change to oppress Christians is a complex and multifaceted issue. On the surface, it may seem like a far-fetched claim, but upon closer examination, it reveals a nuanced narrative of how certain ideological perspectives are promoted, while others are marginalized. The mainstream media's approach to climate change has been largely driven by a secular, liberal worldview, which often finds itself at odds with traditional Christian values. One of the primary ways in which the media allegedly uses climate change to oppress Christians is by perpetuating a narrative that equates skepticism about climate change with ignorance or backwardness. This narrative is often accompanied by a condescending tone, implying that those who question scientific consensus on climate change are not only misinformed, but also morally inferior. Christians, in particular, are often singled out for their supposed skepticism about climate change, with the media implying that their faith is incompatible with their commitment to environmental stewardship. However, this narrative is not only misleading but also ignores the diversity of Christian perspectives on climate change. Many Christians are deeply concerned about the issue and see it as a moral imperative to care for God's creation. Nevertheless, these voices are often drowned out by the media's focus on the more extreme and vocal elements of the Christian right, which are often portrayed as being in denial about climate change. Another way in which the media uses climate change to oppress Christians is by promoting a secular, eco-utopian vision of the future, which is often at odds with traditional Christian values. This vision often emphasizes the need for radical lifestyle changes, population control, and the rejection of traditional notions of economic growth and prosperity. Christians, who are often committed to a more nuanced view of human nature and the role of economic development in promoting human flourishing, are often seen as obstacles to the achievement of this vision. Furthermore, the media's coverage of climate change often ignores the complex moral and ethical dimensions of the issue, reducing it to a simplistic narrative of good vs. evil. This narrative often pits the enlightened, secular elites against the supposedly ignorant and reactionary Christians who are seen as being on the wrong side of history. However, this narrative ignores the fact that climate change is a complex, multifaceted issue that requires a nuanced and thoughtful approach, one that takes into account the competing moral and ethical claims of different stakeholders. In addition, the media's use of climate change as a wedge issue has also contributed to the marginalization of Christian perspectives. By framing climate change as a litmus test of moral credibility, the media has created a toxic atmosphere in which Christians who question the scientific consensus or express skepticism about certain climate policies are ostracized and demonized. This has had a chilling effect on public discourse, making it increasingly difficult for Christians to engage in thoughtful and constructive discussions about climate change without fear of being labeled as deniers or science haters. Ultimately, the mainstream media's use of climate change to oppress Christians is a symptom of a deep ideological divide between the secular, liberal elites and the traditional, faith-based communities. By promoting a narrative that equates climate skepticism with ignorance and backwardness, the media has created a culture of intolerance and marginalization, in which certain perspectives are excluded from the public conversation. To create a more inclusive and nuanced public discourse, it is essential to recognize the diversity of Christian perspectives on climate change and to engage with these perspectives in a thoughtful and respectful manner. Only then can we hope to build a more just and sustainable future, one that takes into account the competing moral and ethical claims of different stakeholders.